For the sake of YouTube's strict copyright rules, this episode of Awesome Albums doesn't include the music. You are welcome to continue watching this version, but I recommend going to the Awesome Albums website or the other link below to enjoy the Awesome Albums episode the way I intended it to be heard. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. Today we are finishing our trilogy about The Who's 1973 album, Quadrophenia. Before we get started, if you haven't seen parts 1 and part 2 yet, I encourage you to pause this video and watch those first. Part 1 goes over the history of the album, the subsequent tour, and talking about the album cover and the gatefold. Part 2 talks about disc 1 of the double album, and today we will talk about disc 2 of this legendary double album. Let's introduce the band one more time and get started. Roger Daltrey on lead vocals, John Entwistle on bass, horns, and vocals, Keith Moon on drums, percussion, and vocals, and Pete Townshend, who does everything else. Keyboards, guitars, vocals, cello, banjo, and sound effects. He is also our primary songwriter and is credited with writing every song on the album. Now that we got introductions out of the way, let's get started. We are greeted with a piano performance by guest musician Chris Staten, then vocals come in. Townshend sings the intro and the coda, followed by Daltrey, who sings the rest of the song before greeted with Entwistle's horns. The whistle heard on the track was recorded after Townshend's driver bribed a British train driver £5 to sound the train's whistle as it pulled out, despite breaking the station rules. Usually the song is written like this, but I've also seen it written out like this, and this as well. This is the debut single for the album, released on October 5th, 1973, backed with the song Water. It hit number 20 on the charts in Britain and number 46 in Germany. The remix movie version was also released as a single in September of 1979, backed with I'm One. The 1979 version hit number 45 on the Billboard Hot 100 in America. Record World described the song as all the thunderous fury that so often dominates The Who's music is ever present, end quote. A 7-inch single of the song also exists, and is described with having a narrower, closed stereo compared to the wider landscape of the album version, however, still has very powerful dynamics. This particular mix is not released on CD, and all compilations claiming to have the single mix actually has the album mix and cut to a variety of different running time lengths, plus or minus a few seconds. Daltrey said, really, it was the only single on Quadrophenia we could have released, end quote. This is the only song on the album that doesn't have a demo, as the track was written on the day it was recorded and is the only song arranged by the group in the studio. During the 1999 to 2002 tour, Entwistle played a solo mid-song. During their 2012 Quadrophenia tour, his bass solo was featured by showing footage from a 2000 performance at the Royal Albert Hall while drummer Zach Starkey played live. This was probably the first footage of Entwistle that I've seen, and my jaw dropped on just how amazing he was. Now for the context of Jimmy's story in the song. Remember, the whole album is telling a story about a young man named Jimmy who's trying to find his identity in the world despite his four-way split quadrophenic personality. Pete Townshend says, his train journey to Brighton, sandwiched between two city gents, is notable for the rather absurd number of amphetamines he consumes to pass the time. He goes through a not entirely pleasant series of ups and downs as he thinks about the gaudier side of life as a teenager that we see in the newspapers like the News of the World. 515 was written in Oxford Street and Carnaby Street while I was killing time between appointments. I must try it again sometime. It seems to work, end quote. The opening lyrics, Here by Sea and Sand, Nothing Ever Goes as Planned, is a well-remembered Who lyric. During the 1996 performance of Quadrophenia at Madison Square Garden, fans sang this line along with other lines from the song as they were leaving the arena. The song may not have been released as a single, but it still got significant airplay on progressive rock radio stations. Richard Neer of WNEW-FM in New York labeled this song as the album's best. Jimmy makes it to his destination in Brighton. He comes off his amphetamine rush only to discover a quiet little town, so different from the way he remembered it. He then thinks about his parents, his ex-girlfriend, and the mods he hung around with. Pete Townshend said, arriving at Brighton, Jimmy brightens up a bit. Get the pun? He talks about Rose at home, and he's a little sarcastic as he recalls the evening on the beach with his former girlfriend. This is 1965, and the mod scene is already falling apart. And what does he do but go to Brighton just to remember? The crazy days when 300,000 mod kids from London descended on the little beach town were only 3 weeks ago. but he's already living in the past, end quote. The song could be interpreted as autobiographical with Pete's own growing alienation from his band and the music scene as a whole. The end of the song features Pete singing, "I'm the face if you want it, baby, I'm the face if you want it," which is a reference to The Who's first single when they were known as The High Numbers, released all the way back in 1964. Another song featuring Chris Staten playing piano. The piano part was borrowed from the song Hitchcock Railway by Joe Cocker, which also features Staten on piano. Music critic Chris Charlesworth described the song as a tough blues-based rocker and praises Staten's great piano work. Charlesworth said the band loved to play it live since it was less complex than the other songs from the album. It didn't require any backing tapes and often performed as a full band jam. Though Daltrey sang the original album version, Townsend would take over the lead vocals after Moon's death in '78, and Daltrey would play a blues harmonica throughout the song. From the 1996-97 tours to 2012, it was played as an acoustic guitar-only solo performance by Townsend. The 2012 and 13 Quadrophenia and More tour featured a full band arrangement with Townsend on lead vocals. Rolling Stone critic Dave Marsh describes the song as among the most interesting on the album. And it's an interesting song. It was originally written as an ode to Mayor Baba in early 1970. Townsend sang it facing the tomb of Baba on his first visit to India in January 1972. Pete said, "When the tragic hero of Q sings it, it is desperate and nihilistic. In fact, it's a love song, God's love being the ocean and ourselves being the drops of water that make it up. Mayor Baba said, 'I am the ocean of love. I want to drown in that ocean. The drop will then be an ocean itself,'" end quote. Oh, I love how the song has a brief reprise of the horns from 515 in it. Now, in the context of the story, Pete describes that it is here that Jimmy reflects on his life and everything that happened in 515 and is contemplating jumping in the water and drowning. One last quote from Pete, he said, "When recording the song, it rained so hard in Battersea, where our studio is, that the walls were flowing with sheets of water. Chris Staten played piano in a booth, and when the take was finished, he opened the door and about 500 gallons gushed out. Another glorious coincidence," end quote. This song is sometimes written out as Bellboy Keith's theme. Each member of The Who has a theme. We heard Roger's theme in Helpless Dancer, and now we're hearing Keith's theme. And it's also fitting to actually hear Keith Moon sing it. Moon mostly talks or sings his line in a cartoonish voice with an exaggerated Cockney accent. However, the bridge of the song and the last line are sung in his natural voice. The song, no surprise, is a fan favorite done live because of Moon's comedic vocals, and fans persisted on requesting it even after it was dropped in 1975 until Moon's death. The song was revived for the 96-97 tour, but the Ace Face would be a guest replacing Moon's role. On the Quadrophenia and More shows, it was performed with old footage of Moon. Speaking of the Ace Face, Pete says about the song, he, referring to Jimmy, meets an old Ace Face who now holds position as a bellboy at the very hotel the mods tore up. He looks on Jimmy with a mixture of pity and contempt. The two argue as Jimmy feels that Ace Face has sold out. Jimmy is now feeling that everything, even the mod lifestyle, has let him down, end quote. Bellboy, I've got to get running now. Bellboy, keep my lip button down. Jimmy and Ace Face argue before Moon sings in his normal voice, "A beach is a place where a man can feel he's the only soul in the world that's real." If you listen to the music, you can hear a synthesizer rendition of the tune from Helpless Dancer. "Ain't you the guy who used to set the paces, riding up in front of 100 faces?" These lines refer to the 100 Faces, a fan club set up by ex-Who managers Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp to promote the group in their early days. One more fact about the song, engineer Ron Nevson told Songfacts, "The biggest problem with Keith on drums was finding a place to put the microphones. He had so many drums, 2 hi-hats, 2 kick drums, 6 or 8 tom-toms, it was challenging just to get the snare covered," end quote. We flip the record over to side 4. This is the longest song on the album at over 8.5 minutes long. This song is sometimes written as Dr. Jimmy, including John's theme, Is It Me? This is the B-side single to The Real Me, released on January 12, 1974. The song has a complex composition featuring horns and strings with one of Daltrey's strongest vocal performances on the album. Pete describes, "Jimmy begins to damage himself so badly on drugs and alcohol that he gets to the point where he's so desperate that he'll take a closer look at himself. This part of the story shows the lunatic within him. The chorus, Dr. Jimmy and Mr. Jim, is an ambiguous reference to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which closely links to the multiple personality theme running throughout the story," end quote. The song ends with one of my favorite parts on the entire album. The last minute and a half ends with the music surging. The music gets faster and louder before everything fades out except piano and synthesizer, as we're greeted with another reference to the Quadrophenia theme, I call it, before transitioning to the next song. This might be my favorite song transition in all of classic rock. Sean and You Crazy Diamond going into Welcome to the Machine is also high up there though. Oh man, that's an album I need to talk about sometime. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information about this, so I won't be able to spend a lot of time on this great instrumental track. This is the third instrumental track on the album after I Am the Sea, the album opener, and the title track, Quadrophenia. The really cool thing about this track is it features elements from all four of The Who's theme songs. First is Keith's theme Bellboy as the chord sequence. It transitions into the Is It Me, which is John's theme. The music continues to surge until we hear a reprise of Roger's theme Helpless Dancer on guitar and piano. Drums, synthesizer, and bass join in before we switch to Pete's theme, which we haven't heard yet as a counter melody, Love Reign Over Me, played on guitar as the Quadrophenia theme plays. Oh man, this is such a great song. Easily one of my favorite instrumental tracks of all time. Jimmy has stolen a boat to take out to a rock in the middle of an ocean, where he sits and watches the waves as he sits and thinks on what to do next. The song ends with an explosion of rain and thunder, and more rain as we transition into the album's closing track. Like I just said, Love Reign Over Me sometimes has the subtitle of Pete's theme. This is one of the oldest songs on the album. This and Is It In My Head date back to 1972 and were originally intended to be part of an unreleased autobiographical album, Rock Is Dead, Long Live Rock, which later evolved into this album. Love Reign Over Me was chosen to be the lead single in the US, released on October 27th. It peaked at number 76 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 54 on Cashbox, backed with Water. The single version is shorter, missing the rain sounds and the first piano intro and the timpani and the gong crash, which is probably the best part of this already incredible song. Cashbox said, "That powerhouse performance from Peter Townsend and the gang, coupled with super lyrics and production, make this one of the closest things to an automatic hit yet," end quote. In 2012, Paste ranked the song at number 1 on their 20 Greatest Who songs, and in 2022, Rolling Stone ranked the song at number 5 on their 50 Greatest Who songs. Awesome Albums ranked it at number 1 on the 50 Greatest Who songs. Yes, me. I made a list. You can check out the full list on Awesome Albums' website, link below. The first link is number 50 to 26, and then the second link is number 25 to number 1. Now, I already spoiled the number 1 pick, but it's still a good list in my opinion, but of course I'd say that it's my list. No surprise, the Quadrophenia theme, I keep calling it, is heavily prevalent in the song, and I'm going to continue to welcome that sound. It adds so much immersion to the music. Speaking of the immersion, can we talk about Roger's vocals for a bit? His screams of desperation is so powerful. Mark Deming of AllMusic noted that Quadrophenia captured him at the very peak of his powers, and Love Reign Over Me is one moment where his golden-haired rock god persona truly works and gives the song all the force it truly deserves, end quote. Roger answers a question to Q magazine about Pete Townsend struggling to write songs for his voice. Roger said, "It's what makes The Who what it is. That's always been Pete's thing, writing songs with a different lead singer in mind. When you listen to something like Love Reign Over Me, he wrote it as an enlightened spiritual piece of music, and I went and sang it with this cream of frustration from the street. Not what we had in mind, but the great thing about The Who was that we all had that intelligence to realize when someone was putting in something valuable," end quote. Piggybacking off of Roger talking about enlightened spiritual piece of music, Pete said, "It refers to Mayor Baba's one-time comment that rain was a blessing from God. The thunder was God's voice. It's another plea to drown, only this time in rain." Jimmy goes through a word I probably can't say on YouTube, crisis. He surrenders to the inevitable, and when it's over, he goes back to town. He'll be going through the same stuff, being in the same family situation and so on, but he's moved up a level. He's still weak, but there's a strength in that weakness. He's in danger of maturing, end quote. The song was first performed live on their 1973 tour, but dropped after the tour. It returned to the setlist in 1982 for the North American Farewell Tour, and also performed again at Live Aid on July 13th, 1985. When they performed Quadrophenia in its entirety in 1996, the band was joined by Pink Floyd guitarist David Gilmour. At their 2002 concert at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles, California, the first after John Entwistle's death that year, it was brought back and performed on their Quadrophenia and More tour, the Who Hits 50 tour, and the Moving On tour. You can also enjoy the song on live albums including Who's Last, Greatest Hits Live, Joined Together, live from Toronto, Quadrophenia live in London, live at the Isle of Wight Festival 2004, and the Who live in Hyde Park. The end of the song ends in a loud crash. That was achieved by Townsend and Nevison setting up a large group of percussion instruments which Moon played before kicking over the set over some tubular bells, which that can all be heard in the final seconds of the song. And whew, that's always an album I need to sit in silence for a minute before I do anything else. What a rush! No wonder why a lot of people say this is the best Who album. Do I agree? I'm not sure. I'm always split between this and Who's Next, with Tommy close behind. But it might be. The story, while confusing until making this video, is good, but the themes, the motifs, the throwbacks to the Who's early years, and just the references to the other songs on the album just make this such a great musical experience from beginning to end. Chris Welch of Melody Maker said, "Rarely have a group succeeded in distilling their essence and embracing a motif as convincingly," end quote. Charles Shar Murray said, "Most rewarding musical experience of the year." Lenny Kaye of Rolling Stone said, "The Who as a whole have never sounded better." Robert Christgau wrote in Christgau's record guide Rock Albums of the 70s in 1981, regarded Quadrophenia as more of an opera than Tommy, possessing a brilliant, albeit confusing plot, jarring but melodic music, and compassionate lyrics about every kid as a heroic F-up, smart enough to have a good idea of what's being done to him, and so sensitive he gets pushed right to the edge anyway, end quote. The album reached number 2 in the UK, only behind David Bowie's Pin-Ups, which is a cover album, which features 2 Who songs on it, I Can't Explain and Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere. It also reached number 2 on the US Billboard chart, the highest position of any Who album in the country, only behind Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Q magazine ranked the album at number 56 on the list of 100 greatest British albums ever. Rolling Stone ranked it at number 267 on the 500 greatest albums of all time. VH1 ranked it at number 86 on their list of the 100 greatest albums of all time. The album became a certified platinum in the US for selling over 1 million albums, which is impressive. This has been Awesome Andrew telling you that The Who's Quadrophenia is an awesome album, and I hope to see you guys in another video. Music critic Chris yeah, there we go. Music critic Chris